Tonight's story is in regards to the Ottoman Empire, 600 years of power and decline. If this type of storytelling helps you calm down and go to sleep peacefully, don't disregard to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Also, let me understand in the feedback where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Now, if you are competent, flip off the lights, create a peaceful and comfortable surroundings for yourself, and let the soothing sound of a crackling fireplace consultant you into this charming experience by means of history. Chapter 1. The Birth of an Empire, from nomadic tribes to imperial foundations en 1299 a 1402, within the closing years of the 13th century, as the Byzantine Empire crumbled and the Mongol hordes disrupted the Islamic heartlands to the east, a small frontier principality emerged in the rugged terrain of northwestern Anatolia. This principality would become the genesis of some of the enduring empires in historical past, the Ottoman Empire. Its founder, Osman I, was once an bold and charismatic tribal leader who turned a modest beylik into the groundwork of a Islamic empire. The rise of the Ottomans used to be no longer instantaneous nor guaranteed, but their story starts afeveled with a confluence of favorable geography, declining opponents, and strategic brilliance. Origins within the frontier. Osman I, known as Osman Ghazi, was born around 1258 into the Kai branch of the Ottoman Turks. His father, Ertugrul Ghazi, had migrated to Anatolia as part of the westward motion of Turkic nomads fleeing the Mongol invasions of critical Asia. Ertugrul entered the provider of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, which had fragmented into semi-self-reliant principalities by means of the late 13th century. Upon Ertugrul's demise, Osman inherited management of the tribe, and its lands closed the town of Sta strategic vicinity on the borderlands between the Christian Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. These borderlands, known as the UC regions, weren't simply zones of clash, but additionally of opportunity. Ghazi warriors' Muslim frontier opponents flocked to the vicinity to wage Gaza, a holy battle against the Byzantines. This ideology of devout battle furnished Osman's principality with each a spiritual purpose and a consistent inflow of expert warriors and adventurers. The upward push of Osman proved to be no longer handist, a skilled military leader, but additionally a clever political operator. His earliest conquests were modest, small Byzantine fortresses and towns alongside the Sakarya River, akin to Yenisehir and Bilchek. These victories introduced him status and allowed him to relax alliances via marriage and patronage. He married Malhan Hatun, daughter of a powerful neighborhood noble, and used her dowry and connections to solidify his impact. Osman's ambitions were encapsulated in the famous Osman's Dream, a legendary vision wherein a tree grew from his navel and spread internationally, symbolizing the titanic way forward for his dynasty. Although doubtless apocryphal and recorded long after his death, the story reflects the early Ottomans' experience of destiny. Osman's military campaigns culminated within the seas of the Byzantine town of Bursa in 1326, a moment mostly marked as the proper opening of Ottoman imperial historical past. Though Osman died before the town fell, his son Orhan Ghazi accomplished the conquest and declared Bursa the first capital of the Ottoman state. Orhan Ghazi and the transformation of a principality on Orhana, 1326 to 1362. The Ottoman state underwent critical institutional transformations. He offered the primary formal government structures, a standing army referred to as the Yaya, and Musalim, rudimentary techniques of taxation, and coinage bearing the identify of the Sultanan Declaration of Sovereignty. Orhan also took knowledge of Byzantine weak spot to develop into Thrace. In 1354, an earthquake broke the fortress of Gallipoli, and Orhan's son, Suleiman Pasha, swiftly occupied it. This marked the primary Ottoman foothold in Europe and signaled the empire's eventual status as a transcontinental vigour. In addition, Orhan deepened Ottoman legitimacy with the aid of marrying Theodora, the daughter of Byzantine Emperor John VI, and forging temporary alliances with Christian powers, highlighting a practical streak that may represent Ottoman diplomacy for hundreds of years. Murad I and the consolidation of vigor. The reign of Murad IR, 1362 to 1389, noticed the empire's transformation from a border principality right into a formidable state. Murad shifted the capital from Bursa to Ida and Adrianople, emphasizing the Ottoman center of attention on Europe and the Balkans. Below his leadership, the Ottomans engaged in full-scale wars with Balkan Christian kingdoms and more powerful Serbian and Hungarian forces. Certainly one of Murad's finest improvements was once the construction of the Janissary Corps, an elite infantry composed of Christian boys taken by means of the Devur Maprosha, controversial apply of levying boys from Christian families, changing them to Islam, and training them as squaddies and administrators. This corps grew to become the spine of Ottoman military power and a key school in imperial manipulate. Murad also formalized the Timur procedure, in which land was once granted to cavalrymen Sipahis in return for navy service. This feudal-like structure helped consolidate control over conquered territories and ensured the loyalty of military elites. The Battle of Kosovo in 1389 cemented Murad's legacy. Despite the fact that the Ottomans technically received, Murad was assassinated. After the battle, one of the infrequent situations of a reigning sultan demise on the battlefield, his son, Bayezid I, instantly succeeded him, allegedly executing his brother to do away with a panetza, brutal practice that will end up standard in Ottoman succession. Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt, and the bounds of growth. Bayezid I, ara 1389 a 1402, often called Yildirim the Thunderbolt, was once a dynamic and bold ruler who continued his father's campaigns within the Balkans and Anatolia. His reign used to be marked through each dazzling army successes and crucial missteps. Bayezid intensified campaigns in opposition to the Christian states of southeastern Europe, defeating a coalition of Crusader forces on the Battle of Nik. In 1396, this resounding victory shook Europe and demonstrated Ottoman dominance in the Balkans. Nevertheless, Bayezid's centralization efforts alienated some Turkish emirs in Anatolia. In his try to comprise their territories right into a unified Ottoman state, he provoked resistance amongst rival Muslim dynasties. This inner instability made the empire vulnerable simply as a brand new chance emerged from the east. Tamerlane, Timur, the Turco-Mongol conqueror from Imperative Asia, in 1402. The two titans of the Islamic world clashed at the Fight of Ankara. Bayezid's army was once overwhelmed, and the Sultan himself used to be captured. The Ottoman defeat used to be catastrophic. Bayezid died in captivity, and the empire plunged into civil warfare, a period referred to as the Ottoman Interregnum. 1402 to 1413, the place Bayezid's sons vied for manipulate. Cultural and administrative foundations. Despite its turbulent beginnings, the early Ottoman Empire laid principal administrative, military, and cultural foundations. The incorporation of Islamic associations, alongside pragmatic and localized governance, helped the Ottomans administer a various and increasing populace. The presence of Turkish nomads, Byzantine Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, and Jews required flexibility and tolerance. Religious students ulema had been brought into state service. Mosques and faculties were developed in conquered towns, and a particular Ottoman Islamic culture started out to take form. Sultans patronized structure, calligraphy, and poetry, foreshadowing the cultural richness of the later empire. Legacy of the primary century. First century of Ottoman historical past is a narrative of bold growth, institutional experimentation, and strategic adaptability. What started out as a minor beylik, amid the chaos of publishers Duke Anatolia, advanced right into a dynamic and more centralized state, with aspirations of imperial grandeur. Whilst many factors contributed to the Ottomans' early success, weakened neighbors, devout ideology, their real strength lay in their ability to adapt. From Osman's tribal warband to Bayezid's imperial military, the Ottomans built the scaffolding of what would soon emerge as one of the crucial powerful empires within the early trendy world. However, whilst they extended their borders and consolidated power, cracks had been starting to exhibit. The defeat at Ankara and the following civil battle proven the empire's resilience. Wouldn't it cave in below the burden of its ambitions, or would a new chief emerge to reunite and revitalize it? That question could be answered in the next chapter. Chapter 2. The Fractured Empire, the Ottoman Interregnum, and the Upward Thrust of Mehmed I 1402 to 1421. The thunder of hooves faded from the plains of Ankara in 1402. However, the reverberations of the combat would echo for years throughout the Ottoman domains. The devastating defeat of Sultan Bayezid I through Timur, the lame Tamerlane, now not simplest, humiliated. A once dominant empire, however, left it politically shattered, socially destabilized, and militarily weakened. The ensuing chaos, referred to as the Ottoman interregnum, or fetra devri in Turkish, used to be a near-fatal episode in the early lifetime of the empire. For over a decade, the Ottoman state teetered on the edge of crumple as sons grew to become in opposition to one another in a bloody civil struggle for supremacy. But from this turbulent interval emerged a new sultan, Mehmed I, who would restoration solidarity, re-establish authority, and prepare the empire for a renewed era of growth. The aftermath of Ankara, July 20th, 1402. Bayezid I suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Timur, close Ankara. The Ottoman navy, exhausted and overconfident, was once overwhelmed by means of Timur's numerically sophisticated and strategically more bendy forces. The fight ended with Bayezid's seize, and he died in captivity just a few months later, reportedly from grief or health problem. Money owed fluctuate. Extra devastating than his loss of life, however, was the truth that no clear successor had been special. Bayezid's sons, Suleiman, Isa, Mehmed, and Musac claimed the correct to rule. Timur, a professional manipulator, compounded the drawback by means of deliberately releasing the princes into their respective spheres of have an impact on, guaranteeing a fragmented and weakened Ottoman political constitution. He also restored a couple of Anatolian beyliksoj, because the Germanids, Karamanids, and Aidganids that Bayezid had conquered. For this reason, dismantling much of the territorial unity the Ottomans had constructed. What followed was no longer purely an energy battle among brothers, however a civil warfare that would final over a decade. The empire fractured into three primary vigor centers: the Balkans below Suleiman, Western Anatolia under Isa and later Mehmed, and northerly Anatolia underneath Musa. A kingdom divided. Prince versus Princess Suleiman. Çelebi, in Rumeli, the eldest son, escaped from Ankara and took manipulate of the Exu provinces of the empire from his base in Adrian. He maintained peace with Christian neighbors, just like the Byzantines and the Hungarians, and even returned some lands to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II, Palaeologos, to relax the non-aggression PC Suleiman's rule. Nevertheless, used to be marred by using accusations of weak point. His reliance on Christian alliances alienated segments of the Muslim populace and the Ghazi warriors, who saw his diplomacy as betrayal. Nevertheless, he managed to preserve Rumelia together via cautious governance, administrative reforms, and military deterrence, though continuously under the looming threat of his brothers. Isa Çelebi, in Western Anatolian. The meantime, Isa Çelebi claimed manipulate over Bursa and the core Anatolian territories. His rule was once brief-lived. In 1405, he clashed together with his brother Mehmed close. Uliobad, Mehmed emerged victorious, killing Isa and consolidating manage over Western Anatolia. This victory marked Mehmed's first primary step toward ideal dominance. Musa Çelebi and the Balkan mission. Musa Çelebi, an additional of Bayezid's sons, originally served beneath Mehmed as a subordinate governor. Nevertheless, after Suleiman's growing unpopularity in the Balkans, Mehmed strategically sent Musa across the straits to assignment him. Musa ultimately defeated Suleiman and seized Idon, assuming control of Rumelia. Now the empire was once divided between Mehmed in Anatolia and Musa in Europe. Two brothers locked in an ultimate contest for the throne. Mehmed I, to history as Mehmed Çelebi and later as Mehmed I, the fourth son of Bayezid I, proved to be essentially the most tactful and determined of the contenders. His rule, which started unofficially in 1403 and formally after Musa's defeat in 1413, was characterized through political savvy, strategic patience, and a deep figuring out of the empire's fractured nature. Mehmed first ensured peace within Anatolia with the aid of eliminating opponents and neutralizing the not too long ago restored Anatolian beylik. He used marriage alliances, devout legitimacy, and calculated navy drive to bring these territories back into the Ottoman fold. In the Balkans, Musa's authoritarianism and hostility toward the Christian population alienated many neighborhood leaders. Mehmed exploited this by means of forging alliances with Serbian despot Stefan Lazarević, the Byzantines, and even Hungarian factions. With their support, he crossed into Europe and met Musa at the combat of Comelu in 1413. Musa used to be defeated and killed, Mehmed emerged as the sole ruler of the Ottoman realm. Accordingly, after 11 years of internecine strife, Mehmed was once crowned in Idon as Sultan of the Ottoman lands. The interregnum had ended. The empire, although scarred and smaller than before, had survived. Governance and diplomacy in a restored empire meant the eyes, reign 1413 to 1421, used to be no longer marked by grand conquests or ostentatious development projects. However, with the aid of cautious consolidation, his priorities were steadiness, fiscal recovery, and rebuilding associations. He reinstated a centralized bureaucratic method, curbed the independence of rebellious governors, and re-established tax systems that had collapsed during the civil battle. In diplomacy, Mehmed walked a tightrope. He maintained peace with the Byzantine Empire, reaffirmed treaties with Serbia and Hungary, and allowed Christian rulers autonomy in trade for loyalty. This policy enabled him to focus on inner remedy and no longer overstretch military assets. But he was once additionally deeply mindful of the symbolic and spiritual authority required of a sultan. He commenced to kind himself more formally as a caliph in Ghazi, sponsoring devout students and rebuilding Islamic associations. He re-established patronage networks to re-legitimize Ottoman rule after a decade of chaos. The upward push of religious dissent, Sheikh Bedreddin's rebellion, all used to be calm throughout Mehmed's rule. The interregnum had created social and religious rifts. One of the vital big challenges got here from Sheikh Bedreddin, a former Qadi and Sufi mystic who had served as chief judge under Musa Kelabai. Disappointed with the re-establishment of crucial power, Bedreddin launched a well-known religious and social revolt in 1416. He preached radical equality between Muslims, Christians, and Jews, denounced centralized authority, and referred to as for communal land ownership, drawing support from peasants, dispossessed dervishes, and marginalized corporations. The rebel unfolded via the Balkans and constituents of Western Anatolia, but Mehmed acted decisively. Bedreddin was captured, tried, and carried out. At the same time, the uprising was suppressed. It published the deep fractures in Ottoman society and the developing tensions between the centralizing state and the non-secular undercurrents of its population. Mehmed's legacy. Mehmed died in 1421, in all likelihood from sickness, and used to be buried in a Turk tomb in Bursa next to his ancestors. Although his reign used to be rather quick and lacking in territorial conquests, it was a crucial turning factor. Mehmed's legacy lies in protection and restoration. At a moment when the empire would have quite simply dissolved into a failed medieval experiment, he stabilized it, re-legitimized the dynasty, and set the stage for future enlargement. His success was now, not in simple terms political, but symbolic. He reminded his subjects, Muslim and Christian, Turk and Slav, elite and commoner, that the Ottoman state was more than the sum of its battles. It was once a dynastic, devout, and administrative force competent of weathering colossal crises. With the empire now whole once more, the path used to be clear for brand new ambitions, but with team spirit restored, would the Ottomans resume their expansionist drive. That undertaking would fall to Mehmed's son, Murad II, who would face contemporary crusades, rebellious vassals, and the everlasting challenge of maintaining the empire intact. Chapter 2. The Fractured Empire, the Ottoman Interregnum, and the Upward Thrust of Mehmed. 1402 to 1421. The thunder of hooves faded from the plains of Ankara in 1402. However, the reverberations of the combat would echo for years throughout the Ottoman domains. The devastating defeat of Sultan Bayezid I through Timur, the lame Tamerlane, now not simplest, humiliated a once dominant empire, however, left it politically shattered, socially destabilized, and militarily weakened. The ensuing chaos, referred to as the Ottoman Interregnum, or Fetre Devri in Turkish, used to be a near-fatal episode in the early lifetime of the empire. For over a decade, the Ottoman state teetered on the edge of crumple as sons grew to become in opposition to one another in a bloody civil struggle for supremacy. But from this turbulent interval emerged a new sultan, Mehmed I, who would restoration solidarity, re-establish authority, and prepare the empire for a renewed era of growth. The aftermath of Ankara, July 20th, 1402. Bayezid I suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of Timur, close Ankara. The Ottoman navy, exhausted and overconfident, was once overwhelmed by means of Timur's numerically sophisticated and strategically more bendy forces. The fight ended with Bayezid's seize, and he died in captivity just a few months later, reportedly from grief or health problem. Money owed fluctuate. Extra devastating than his loss of life, however, was the truth that no clear successor had been special. Bayezid's sons, Suleiman, Isa, Mehmed, and Musac claimed the correct to rule. Timur, a professional manipulator, compounded the drawback by means of deliberately releasing the princes into their respective spheres of have an impact on, guaranteeing a fragmented and weakened Ottoman political constitution. He also restored a couple of Anatolian beylikshuj, because the Germanids, Karamanids, and Aidganids that Bayezid had conquered. For this reason, dismantling much of the territorial unity the Ottomans had constructed. What followed was no longer purely an energy battle among brothers, however a civil warfare that would final over a decade. The empire fractured into three primary vigor centers: the Balkans below Suleiman, Western Anatolia under Isa and later Mehmed, and northerly Anatolia underneath Musa. A kingdom divided. Prince versus Princess Suleiman. Çelebi, in Rumeli, the eldest son, escaped from Ankara and took manipulate of the Exu provinces of the empire from his base in Adrian. He maintained peace with Christian neighbors, just like the Byzantines and the Hungarians, and even returned some lands to the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II, Paleologos, to relax the non-aggression PC Suleiman's rule. Nevertheless, used to be marred by using accusations of weak point. His reliance on Christian alliances alienated segments of the Muslim populace and the Ghazi warriors, who saw his diplomacy as betrayal. Nevertheless, he managed to preserve Rumelia together via cautious governance, administrative reforms, and military deterrence, though continuously under the looming threat of his brothers. Isa Çelebi, in Western Anatolian. The meantime, Isa Çelebi claimed manipulate over Bursa and the core Anatolian territories. His rule was once brief-lived. In 1405, he clashed together with his brother Mehmed close. Uliobad, Mehmed emerged victorious, killing Isa and consolidating manage over Western Anatolia. This victory marked Mehmed's first primary step toward ideal dominance. Musa Çelebi and the Balkan mission. Musa Çelebi, an additional of Bayezid's sons, originally served beneath Mehmed as a subordinate governor. Nevertheless, after Suleiman's growing unpopularity in the Balkans, Mehmed strategically sent Musa across the straits to assignment him. Musa ultimately defeated Suleiman and seized Idon, assuming control of Rumelia. Now the empire was once divided between Mehmed in Anatolia and Musa in Europe. Two brothers locked in an ultimate contest for the throne. Mehmed I, to history as Mehmed Çelebi, and later as Mehmed I. The fourth son of Bayezid I, proved to be essentially the most tactful and determined of the contenders. His rule, which started unofficially in 1403 and formally after Musa's defeat in 1413, was characterized through political savvy, strategic patience, and a deep figuring out of the empire's fractured nature. Mehmed first ensured peace within Anatolia with the aid of eliminating opponents and neutralizing the not too long ago restored Anatolian beylik. He used marriage alliances, devout legitimacy, and calculated navy drive to bring these territories back into the Ottoman fold. In the Balkans, Musa's authoritarianism and hostility toward the Christian population alienated many neighborhood leaders. Mehmed exploited this by means of forging alliances with Serbian despot Stefan Lazarević, the Byzantines, and even Hungarian factions. With their support, he crossed into Europe and met Musa at the combat of Comelu in 1413. Musa used to be defeated and killed. Mehmed emerged as the sole ruler of the Ottoman realm. Accordingly, after 11 years of internecine strife, Mehmed was once crowned in Idon as Sultan of the Ottoman lands. The interregnum had ended. The empire, although scarred and smaller than before, had survived. Governance and diplomacy in a restored empire meant the I's reign 1413 to 1421 used to be no longer marked by grand conquests or ostentatious development projects. However, with the aid of cautious consolidation, his priorities were steadiness, fiscal recovery, and rebuilding associations. He reinstated a centralized bureaucratic method, curbed the independence of rebellious governors, and re-established tax systems that had collapsed during the civil battle. In diplomacy, Mehmed walked a tightrope. He maintained peace with the Byzantine Empire, reaffirmed treaties with Serbia and Hungary, and allowed Christian rulers autonomy in trade for loyalty. This policy enabled him to focus on inner remedy and no longer overstretch military assets. But he was once additionally deeply mindful of the symbolic and spiritual authority required of a sultan. He commenced to kind himself more formally as a caliph in Ghazi, sponsoring devout students and rebuilding Islamic associations. He re-established patronage networks to re-legitimize Ottoman rule after a decade of chaos. The upward push of religious dissent, Sheikh Bedreddin's rebellion, all used to be calm throughout Mehmed's rule. The interregnum had created social and religious rifts. One of the vital big challenges got here from Sheikh Bedreddin, a former Qadi and Sufi mystic who had served as chief judge under Musa Kelabai. Disappointed with the re-establishment of crucial power, Bedreddin launched a well-known religious and social revolt in 1416. He preached radical equality between Muslims, Christians, and Jews, denounced centralized authority, and referred to as for communal land ownership, drawing support from peasants, dispossessed dervishes and marginalized corporations. The rebel unfolded via the Balkans and constituents of Western Anatolia, but Mehmed acted decisively. Bedreddin was captured, tried, and carried out. At the same time, the uprising was suppressed. It published the deep fractures in Ottoman society and the developing tensions between the centralizing state and the non-secular undercurrents of its population. Mehmed's legacy. Mehmed I died in 1421, in all likelihood from sickness, and used to be buried in a Turb tomb in Bursa next to his ancestors. Although his reign used to be rather quick and lacking in territorial conquests, it was a crucial turning factor. Mehmed's legacy lies in protection and restoration. At a moment when the empire would have quite simply dissolved into a failed medieval experiment, he stabilized it, re-legitimized the dynasty, and set the stage for future enlargement. His success was now, not in simple terms political, but symbolic. He reminded his subjects, Muslim and Christian, Turk and Slav, elite and commoner, that the Ottoman state was more than the sum of its battles. It was once a dynastic, devout, and administrative force competent of weathering colossal crises. With the empire now whole once more, the path used to be clear for brand new ambitions, but with team spirit restored, would the Ottomans resume their expansionist drive. That undertaking would fall to Mehmed's son, Murad II, who would face contemporary crusades, rebellious vassals, and the everlasting challenge of maintaining the empire intact. Chapter 4. The Conquest of Constantinople. Mehmed II and the Daybreak of an Empire, 1451 to 1453. The 12 months was 1451. Sultan Murad II, professional ruler and consolidator of the Ottoman realm, had handed away in the quiet city of Edirne. Upon the throne ascended his son, a person most effective, 19 years, historic but shaped by way of years of observation, training, and humiliation, Mehmed II. The arena remembered him because the boy sultan who had, in short, reigned, at age 12, after which been compelled to abdicate throughout the situation of the Crusade of Varna. But this time, Mehmed would now not yield. He returned to energy not as a hesitant baby, but as a determined visionary. His ambition used to be audacious, bordering on the mythic, to grab the greatest prize in Christendom, the ancient capital of the Roman and Byzantine world, Constantinople. What, adopted over the subsequent 2 years, would turn into the Ottoman principality into an empire, end the Middle a while, and shock both East and West. It will make Mehmed a legend. The person historical past would perpetually recollect as Mehmed the Conqueror. Fatih Sultan Mehmed, Constantinople, the eternal metropolis. By the mid-15th century, Constantinople stood as a shadow of its former glory. Once the thriving center of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire, it had been lowered to a city of roughly 50,000 residents, stricken by crumbling infrastructure, inside decay, and a shrinking sphere of influence. Surrounded on either side by Ottoman territory, it remained an island of Christianity in a Muslim sea. Yet its symbolic and strategic importance was massive. For the Byzantines and all of Christendom, it used to be the non-secular successor of Rome, the seat of Orthodox Christianity and a sacred fortress. For the Ottomans, it represented a bridge between Asia and Europe, an imperative trade hub, and the last thorn within the coronary heart of their dominion. Mehmed II was determined to take it, and nothing would stand in his means. A sultan His second ascension in 1451, Mehmed II immediately set to work making ready for the satisfactory conquest. He knew that his father's failure to seize Constantinople in 1422 stemmed from each logistical constraints and political resistance from within the court and the ulema. This time, Mehmed consolidated energy swiftly. He appointed loyal viziers, removed conservative factors from court, and imposed his vision upon each civil and navy institutions. He additionally moved decisively to comfortable the empire's peripheries, signing brief-term peace treaties with Hungary, Venice, and Serbia. These truces purchased him valuable time to focal point completely on the mission at hand. Most significantly, Mehmed began the construction of a huge fortress on the European facet of the Bosporus Rumeli Hisari, or the Fortress of Europe. Accomplished in less than 4 months in 1452, it instantly faced the older Anadolu Hisari throughout the strait, permitting the Ottomans to manage all naval traffic into the Black Sea, reducing off Constantinople's exchange and resupply routes. The message used to be clear. The siege was once coming. Preparations for battle to breach the legendary partitions of Constantinople. Mehmed needed greater than men, he wanted technology. He employed Orban, a Hungarian engineer who had defected to the Ottoman court docket after being rejected with the aid of the Byzantines. As a result of lack of money, Orban developed for Mehmed the biggest cannon the world had visible up to now, called the best Turkish bombard, or readily the Basilica. It used to be over 8 meters 27 feet long and would fireplace gigantic stone balls, weighing over 500 kilograms 100 lb. Although slow and complex to maneuver, it used to be an innovative progress in siege war. Moreover, Mehmed assembled a significant military via most estimates between 80,000 and 100,000 men, including janissaries, sipahis, artillery items, and auxiliaries. A colossal naval force was once also raised, estimated at over 100 ships, together with galleys and supply vessels. The Byzantine defenders, led by means of Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, had far fewer resources. Their total force numbered maybe 7,000 to 8,000 guys, including 2,000 international mercenaries, probably the most brilliant of whom was once Giovanni Giustiniani, a skilled Genoese commander who used to be entrusted with the protection of towns. Walls. The walls themselves were formidable, triple-layered, 12 meters, excessive and a few meters thick, buttressed with towers, moats, and iron gates. For hundreds of years that they had withstood numerous sieges. However, science, unravel, and sheer numbers were about to experiment them, as in no way earlier than. The siege begins, April 6, 1453. On April 6, 1453, the Ottoman army encamped outside Constantinople and began the formal siege. What adopted used to be a brutal, 2-month lengthy campaign of artillery bombardment, strategic deception, and psychological warfare. Mehmed centered his cannons on key vulnerable points in the Theodosian walls. In particular, closed the Mesotete, the place the land wall was believed to be most vulnerable. The massive bombardment, although slow, commenced to take its toll. Yet the Byzantines labored tirelessly to restore breaches under quilt of night. The Ottoman navy attempted to dam the Golden Horn. However, the Byzantines, utilizing a colossal iron chain, sealed the entrance. To beat this, Mehmed ordered one of the crucial, boldest maneuvers in military history. He had his ships dragged overland, set up on greased logs by means of the forested hills of Galata, and launched into the Golden Horn behind the chain, bypassing the barrier utterly. The maneuver surprised the Byzantines and opened a brand new front. The defenders, nonetheless, remained decided. Constantine XI was now not a vulnerable monarch. He, for my part, took phase in sorties, rallied morale, and refused to recollect surrender. Pope Nicholas V had promised support, and Byzantine hopes rested on Christian Europe answering the decision. But none got here. Italy was once fractured. France and England had been at struggle, and the Holy Roman Empire was distracted. Constantinople was once on its own. The ultimate assault could 1453, after virtually 8 weeks of siege. With ammunition dwindling and morale rising, Mehmed launched his ultimate all-out assault in the early hours of May, just 29. The assault was once launched in waves. The first wave consisted of irregular forces, volunteers, slaves, and soldiers intended to tire the defenders. The second wave brought in provincial levies and auxiliaries. The one-third, wave incorporated the elite janissary, disciplined and fanatical in their assault on the weakened sections of the wall. Giustiniani, the Genoese commander, was once mortally wounded, and his retreat prompted panic among the defenders. As the Byzantines faltered, Ottoman forces surged via the Kirka Porta Gate, which had been mistakenly left open or evenly guarded. Quickly, the Ottomans breached other sectors. Emperor Constantine XI is believed to have cast off his imperial regalia and died, sword in hand, defending his metropolis to the last dot. Through midday, Constantinople had fallen. After 1 years, the final remnant of the Roman Empire used to be no extra. Aftermath. The triumph of Mehmed the Ottoman forces entered the town in a mix of jubilation and bloodshed. For 3 days, as used to be original in medieval battle, the city was area 2 pillaging. Though Mehmed is alleged to have intervened to protect churches and civilians after the initial chaos subsided, one of his first acts was once to go to the Hagia Sophia, the outstanding cathedral built by way of Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. There, Mehmed ordered it modified right into a mosque, symbolizing the transformation of Constantinople from a Christian imperial capital into the brand new Islamic coronary heart of the Ottoman Empire. He then issued firman's decrees defending the town's remaining Christian population, allowing them to practice their religion below Ottoman supervision. He named Gennadios Scholarios, a respected Orthodox pupil, because the Patriarch of Constantinople, hence integrating the Christian church into the Ottoman millet system. Mehmed immediately started out rebuilding and repopulating the city. He renamed it Istanbul, prompted artisans, merchants, and scholars to settle there, and oversaw the construction of palaces, bazaars, madrasas, and mosques. He aimed to revive town not just as a capital, but because the cosmopolitan and multi-heart of an empire. International reverberations. Fall of Constantinople surprised the Christian world. Pope Nicholas V referred to as for a new campaign that never materialized. Many European intellectuals fled to Italy, carrying ancient Greek manuscripts and serving to ignite the Renaissance. The city's fall also brought about a shift in alternate routes. With the Ottomans now controlling the Silk Road's western terminus, European nations began searching for substitute paths to the east, assuring in the age of exploration. Inside a long time, Columbus would sail westward, and Vasco da Gama would round Africa, partly thus of this conquest to the Islamic world. Nevertheless, Mehmed's triumph was once seen because the finest navy and spiritual victory in centuries. He used to be praised in Cairo, Baghdad, and across Persia as the new defender of the faith. Mehmed the Conqueror. Legacy begins with the conquest of Constantinople. Mehmed too grew to become now not just a sultan, however, an emperor in his possess. He claimed the title Kaiseri Rom, Caesar of Rome, putting forward his legitimacy because the rightful heir of the Roman Byzantine legacy. However, he used to be a ways from finished. Within a long time to come, Mehmed would broaden Ottoman territories into the Balkans, Anatolia, the Black Sea neighborhood, and past. He would codify Ottoman legislation, promote science and artwork, and bring in a new imperial imaginative and prescient that blended Roman and Turkic factors. The conquest of Constantinople was once now not the tip, it used to be the commencing of a new empire, and underneath Mehmed's steering, the Ottomans would enter a golden age. Chapter 5. The imperial architect Mehmed II's reign after the conquest, 1453 to 1481. The thunder of cannons had barely paled from the smouldering partitions of Constantinople, when Mehmed II, now universally hailed as Fatih, the Conqueror, commenced shaping a brand new world. With the city's fall in 1453, the Ottoman state handed an irreversible threshold. It was now not purely a frontier principality or a regional energy. It was once an empire, reborn atop the ruins of Byzantium. Yet conquest was once only the starting. In the just about 3 many years that followed, Mehmed II proved to be more than a warrior. He became an imperial architect, a lawgiver, a buyer of tradition and science, and an uncompromising centralizer of power. The empire he developed would live on for 4 centuries extra, its foundations cemented through his vision, process, and ruthlessness. Rebuilding the capital, Constantinople to Istanbul. The wake of the conquest, Constantinople, now Istanbul, was once a metropolis, one half empty, broken, and bleeding. To make it the capital of a world empire, Mehmed undertook a significant reconstruction and repopulation crusade. He issued firmans requiring the relocation of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish populations from more than a few Ottoman provinces to settle within the metropolis. Skilled artisans from Anatolia and the Balkans have been granted tax exemptions and incentives to move there. This created a multi-ethnic, multi-religious city society that mirrored the varied makeup of the empire itself. Mehmed modified the former imperial palace right into a transitory courtroom, however, soon began development on the Topkapi Palace, which might end up the beating heart of the empire for hundreds of years. He additionally commissioned the constructing of the Grand Bazaar, public baths, madrasas, and mosques, including the Fatih Mosque, which grew to be a symbol of Ottoman devout and political authority. In administration, Mehmed introduced a centralized, bureaucratic structure, moving far away from the semi-feudal autonomy of earlier sultans. He, in my opinion, supervised tax records, appointments, and diplomatic coverage. Everything now flowed from the divinely ordained authority of the sultan, consolidating power, centralization, and legislation. After the conquest, Mehmed moved decisively to eliminate inner dissent and weaken the vigor of the old navy aristocracy. Holders, provincial military landlords had their land provides re-evaluated and their autonomy curtailed. The Janissary cause, once a counterbalance to provincial vigor, was accelerated and tied immediately to the palace via accelerated salaries, privileges, and loyalty rituals. Governors and provincial beys were turned around, extra usually to hinder neighborhood. Entrenchment of vigor might be his most enduring home success was the codification of Ottoman legislation, producing the Canon Ali Osman, a comprehensive legal code that worked alongside Sharia Islamic regulation. It blanketed land tenure, tax premiums, crook punishments, and palace protocols. This ensured authorized consistency across the sprawling and various empire. The message was once clear. There was now one empire, one law, and one sovereign, Mehmed himself. The execution of Qasid Mustafa and fratricide coverage to avert the recurrence of civil wars, just like the Ottoman interregnum. Mehmed made a chilling, however effective, coverage decision. He formalized the execution of royal siblings Kardeş Katli. Whilst fratricide had passed off informally in the past, Mehmed institutionalized it, giving the ruling sultan the authorized correct to do away with rival princes to retain state solidarity. This coverage, controversial even on the time, would shape Ottoman dynastic politics for centuries. When Mehmed's own son ascended the throne, this policy would come to be brutally important. Military enlargement, from the Balkans to the East Devon, at the same time reworking the empire internally. Mehmed remained a tireless campaigner. His purpose was to hold the unification of former Byzantine and Turkic lands and push the Ottoman frontier outward. Balkan campaigns following the conquest of Constantinople. Mehmed sought to neutralize any final Christian threats in the Balkans. In 1454, he moved towards Serbia, shooting Novo Brudu, a primary mining core. In 1459, he utterly annexed Serbia, extinguishing its medieval kingdom. In 1460, the last vestiges of Byzantine Greece fell as the despotate of the Morea was once absorbed into the empire. In 1463, he launched a warfare against Bosnia, shooting it and making it a Sanjak provincial district. Albania, beneath the management of Skanderbeg, remained defiant. Despite years of resistance and repeated Ottoman invasions, Albania used to be no longer wholly subdued unless after Mehmed's loss of life. The autumn of Trebizond 1461 within the east, the ultimate outpost of the Byzantine imperial legacy, the Empire of Trebizond, still clung to the Black Sea coast. Mehmed launched a naval and land crusade that surrounded and subdued the town. Its capture ended the Byzantine imperial line totally and gave the Etonians full control over Anatolia's northern coastline. Conflicts with Karaman and Akoyanluin, vital Anatolia, the Karamanids, a robust Turkic principality, challenged Ottoman authority. Mehmed waged several campaigns towards them, ultimately annexing most of their territory. He also confronted off in opposition to the Akoyanlu Confederation, a strong Turco-Iranian dynasty beneath Uzenhazen. While struggle would intensify later, below Mehmed's son, Mehmed cautiously monitored the east, getting ready for future conflicts. Otranto in Bastion 1480 in a dramatic ultimate act. Mehmed launched a naval invasion of southern Italy, capturing the city of Otranto in 1480. His purpose, by way of some debts, was once to take Rome itself, gratifying an ancient imperial dream. Though the occupation was once brief-lived, Ottoman forces withdrew after his death. It sent shockwaves by means of Europe and proved that the Ottomans had the capability to challenge vigor throughout the Mediterranean. Customer of expertise, science, and the arts, Mehmed was once now not best a warrior and administrator. He used to be an intellectual who noticed himself as a philosopher king in the mold of Alexander the Fine or Caesar Augustus. He spoke multiple languages: Turkish, Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and maintained a courtroom that welcomed scholars, poets, and artists from in every single place the Islamic and Christian worlds. He sponsored Ali Kushch, an astronomer who helped improve Ottoman astronomy. He supported historians and chroniclers who started to put in writing the first specific histories of the empire. He established madrasas, colleges, and libraries, promoting religious as good as scientific finding out. Regardless of his piety, Mehmed maintained a realistic tolerance. He blanketed Christians and Jews, reorganized their communities into millets, and allowed them interior autonomy in alternate for loyalty and tax sales. This pluralism used to be now not altruistic, it used to be strategic. It allowed the Ottomans to absorb conquered populations with minimal resistance, giving the empire social concord without cultural uniformity. Demise and legacy. In 1481, Mehmed set out on yet another military day. Its goal remains a thriller to nowadays. Some speculate it was Rhodes, others say Italy, and even the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt. On May 3, 1481, Mehmed died impulsively near Gebs, potentially from illness or poison. His demise prompted a short trouble, as rival factions debated succession. Eventually, his son Bayezid II took the throne. Mehmed was once buried at the Fatih Mosque in Istanbul, within a grand mausoleum. Inscribed nearby is a line that summarizes his greatness. He conquered Constantinople, and with it, the arena. Mehmed's legacy, the imperial blueprint. Mehmed II's reign marked a change unparalleled in Ottoman history. He redefined the Ottoman state from a dynastic beylik into an imperial superpower, created Istanbul as a brand new Rome, capital of an Islamic world empire, centralized government, strengthening each the military and forms, multiplied east and west, suiting historic Christian and Turkic strongholds, set a precedent for cultural and religious pluralism managed by means of law, not chaos. Below Mehmed, the Ottomans did not, with no trouble, overcome. They ruled, assimilated, and tailored. His successors would inherit a monstrous, coherent, and ambitious empire. Yet with such vigor came tension between sultanic authority and religious associations, between the Devium elite and Turkish nobles, between expansionism and consolidation. These tensions would unfold within the subsequent chapters of Ottoman historical past, but all of them would trace their roots, again, to Mehmed's reign. Chapter 6. The upward thrust of Selim, the grim blood, religion, and the sword, 1481 to 1520. Following the death of Mehmed II in 1481, the Ottoman Empire stood on a precipice. The conqueror had reshaped the empire with steel and decree, but his departure left a vigor vacuum that stirred unrest in the capital and provinces alike. As perpetually in Ottoman subculture, succession used to be no longer in simple terms a ceremonial passage. It was once a brutal contest for survival. The next three a long time would experiment the limits of empire, religion, and royal ambition, as two generations of sultans struggled with inside uprising, international threats, and dynastic rivalry. Amid this turmoil emerged one of the crucial fearsome figures in Ottoman historical past. Selim I identified to history as Yavuz Sultan Selim, or Selim the Grim. In his reign of barely 8 years, 1512 to 1520, Selim would overturn the political and devout order of the Islamic world, reshape Ottoman identification, and develop into the Sultan into a caliph. He left in the back of now not simplest, a vastly multiplied empire, but in addition a legacy of centralized energy, army domination, and devout tension that would echo for hundreds of years. Bayezid II, the pious sultan in an age of fireplace, 1481 to 1512. After Mehmed II's unexpected dying, the throne did not go quietly. His two sons, Bayezid and Sem, raced to assert the empire. Bayezid, the elder, secured help from Istanbul's elite, whilst Sem, governor of Karaman, declared himself sultan in imperative Anatolia. The ensuing civil conflict nearly tore the empire apart. Sem Sultan, the shadow pretender Sem, gained colossal help among Anatolian Muslims, and was once even able to take Bursa. However, Bayezid's tactical alliances with Janissaries and religious elites gave him the upper hand. Sem was defeated and fled to the Mamluk Sultanate, then to Rhodes, and eventually fell into the fingers of the Pope. For over a decade, he was utilized by European powers as a pawn in anti-Ottoman schemes. Bayezid's handling of the Sem main issue mirrored his personality: cautious, diplomatic, and deeply pious. He paid European powers to hold SME imprisoned and out of Ottoman politics. Even as he had received the throne, he would spend a lot of his reign seeking to avert internal conflict rather than inviting it. Home coverage and religious steadiness. Bayezid, too, unlike his father, preferred peace to struggle and diplomacy to conquest. He rebuilt associations, restored infrastructure, and grew to be known as Bayezid the Pious. His court used to be a middle of Islamic scholarship, poetry, and structure. Beneath his reign, mosques, faculties, and hospitals proliferated. Science and the arts flourished, principally in Idon and Istanbul. He welcomed Sephardic Jews expelled from Spain in 1492, resettling them in Ottoman cities and adorning exchange, remedy, and finance. But his piety and passivity had expenditures. The empire's frontiers grew restive. Neighborhood governors sought extra autonomy. In Anatolia, Shia-stimulated revolts began spreading, harbingers of the approaching storm. The upward push of Selim, a prince cast in battle amongst Bayezid's many sons. Selim, governor of Trabzon, stood out for his ambition and ruthlessness. In contrast to his more reserved father, Selim was once a navy man to the core, disciplined, austere, and consumed by means of a vision of Ottoman supremacy. By way of 1511, a new chance erupted in Japanese Anatolia, the Kukulu Uprising, a big uprising led via a charismatic Shia leader loyal to the Safavid dynasty of Iran. This uprising, fueled via growing discontent among Turkmen tribes, represented a sectarian hazard to Sunni Ottoman rule. Selim suppressed the rebellion with equality cruelty, further solidifying his role amongst conservative Sunni elites and the navy. He declared that the Ottoman Empire need to act decisively in opposition to heresy and weakness, implying, no longer so subtly, that his father was unfit to steer. Bayezid, upset and weakened by way of court factions, agreed to abdicate in 1512. Selim, now sultan, moved rapidly to get rid of any threat to his rule, purge and vigor. Securing the throne, Selim I's accession marked a brand new, merciless chapter in Ottoman politics. Inside weeks, he achieved his brothers and their sons to avert any future declare to the throne. Loyalists to Bayezid were purged from the court docket and bureaucracy. He centralized power around his possessed circle of army commanders and authorized students. Bayezid, now in exile, died mysteriously. Many suspected poisoning. Selim confirmed no public mourning and not using a rival's ultimate. Selim reoriented the Ottoman Empire's entire strategic course. He saw the long run now not in the Balkans or the Mediterranean, but within the East. The place the Safavid Empire in Persia and the Mamluk Sultanate in Egypt stood as both religious and geopolitical enemies. The Safavid warfare Chalderan 1514. At the heart of Selim's foreign coverage lay a religious war. The Safavids, led by using Shah Ismail, had been militant, 12er Shiites. Their missionaries had been converting Sunni Anatolian tribes, spreading sedition, and immediately difficult Ottoman legitimacy. Selim declared the Safavids heretics and launched a campaign that culminated within the Battle of Chalderan in 1514. Regardless of Shah Ismail's charisma and devout fervor, the Ottomans geared up with sophisticated firearms and artillery beaten the Safavid forces. The fight was decisive. The Safavids had been pushed again deep into Persia. Ottoman troops captured Tabriz, the Persian capital, although they'd no longer maintain it for long. It used to be a humiliating blow to Shah Ismail, who misplaced status and military momentum. Chaldiran marked the over centuries-long contention between Sunni Ottomans and Shia Persians, a sectarian fault line that reverberates in the area to this present day. The Mamluk campaigns, conquest of Syria and Egypt, 1516 to 1517. With the Safavids weakened, Selim became his attractions. South, the Mamluk Sultanate, centered in Cairo, managed Syria, Palestine, Hejaz, Mecca and Medina, and Egypt the symbolic heartlands of Islam. In 1516, Selim invaded Syria. At the fight of Majd Dabik, the Ottomans routed the Mamluks and killed Sultan Gansu al-Ghuri. Damascus fell, adopted by using Aleppo and Jerusalem. In 1517, Selim pressed on into Egypt. At the Battle of Radanya, external Cairo, the last Mamluk Sultan, Suleiman Bey, was defeated and later executed. The as soon as proud Mamluk Empire was no more. Unifying the Islamic world by means of defeating the Mamluks, Selim accomplished greater than mere conquest. He grew to be the custodian of Mecca and Medina, Islam's holiest cities. He obtained the holy relics of the Prophet Muhammad, transferred from Cairo to Istanbul. He claimed the title of Caliph, commander of the faithful, marking the establishing of the Ottoman Caliphate. This modified the Sultan from a mere emperor to the religious and political chief of Sunni Islam, giving the Ottomans gigantic symbolic legitimacy. Governing a substantial empire, Selim, although especially a warrior, didn't forget about governance. He appointed in a position viziers, together with Piri Mehmed Pasha, to stabilize newly received territories. He reformed taxation to be certain revenue from Egypt and the Levant reached Istanbul successfully. He multiplied the naval capabilities of the empire, watching for conflicts in the Red Sea and Mediterranean. But his court docket was once stark and bloodless. Selim used to be recognized for strict discipline, suspicion, and ordinary executions. Even close allies would be eradicated on the first signal of disloyalty. His type of rule laid the groundwork for future absolutism in the empire. The place, loyalty and hierarchy have been prized over familial ties or regional balance. Dying and legacy. Selim the Grim died unexpectedly in 1520, likely from illness, potentially cancer or an abscess. He was once simplest 49 years historical, although his reign was once temporary. His affect was monumental. He doubled the empire's dimension. He introduced Islam's holy cities below Ottoman rule. He based the Ottoman Sultan as Caliph, reshaping imperial ideology. He laid the basis for Ottoman hegemony over the Arab world. To his critics, Selim used to be a tyrant, person of cruelty and paranoia. To his admirers, he used to be a sword of Islam, a reformer, and the daddy of Ottoman greatness. His greatest legacy, however, can be his son, Suleiman I, destined to be often called the Marvelous. Chapter 7. Suleiman the Magnificent, the Golden Age of the Empire, 1522-1566. When Selim the Grim died in 1520, few could have envisioned the sheer scale of what was to comply with. His most effective surviving son Suleiman ascended the throne on the age of 26, inheriting a monstrous, centralized and militarized empire. But whilst Selim had ruled with iron and hearth, his son would rule with brilliance, stability, and vision, over a reign that lasted 46 years, the longest of any Ottoman sultans. Suleiman, the first, recognized in the West as the superb, and within the Islamic world as Kanuni, the lawgiver, would preside over the greatest territorial, cultural, legal, and administrative expansion in Ottoman historical past. His empire stretched across 3 continents. His navy ruled the seas. His authorized code grew to be the empire's spine, and his court docket became a beacon of artwork, literature, and structure. This was once the golden age of the Ottoman Empire. A new sultan, a new core. Suleiman the First was no longer only a continuation of his father. Informed, multilingual, and culturally refined, he fused imperial ambition with rational administration and deep Islamic devotion. From the very establishment, Suleiman understood that the legitimacy of the Ottoman throne required 3 pillars: army, wood, religious authority, and justice. In his first professional acts, he released unjustly imprisoned officers, reinstated authorized scholars exiled with the aid of Selim, and proclaimed that his rule would embody no longer fear, but fairness, navy glory. Expanding the imperial Thou, Suleiman would later be renowned as a lawgiver. His early years were dominated by way of conquest and war, rivaling even Alexander the Best and Caesar in navy status. The conquest of Belgrade won 5-1. The Hungarian-held Belgrade fortress, once the final predominant Christian stronghold on the Danube, had lengthy eluded Ottoman control. In 1521, launched a meticulously deliberate assault, capturing the fortress after a short but decisive siege. This opened the door for future expansion into important Europe. The fall of Rhodes. 1522 Suleimani's subsequent crusade designated the Knights who had lengthy disrupted Ottoman delivery within the eastern Mediterranean. After a 5-month siege, he captured Rhodes, demonstrating Ottoman naval dominance and giving him control of the important island. The combat of Mohacs War Lil. Perhaps Suleiman's most giant European victory came at Mohacs, the place the Hungarian army led. By using King Louis II, was utterly annihilated. The king drowned for the duration of the retreat, and Hungary ceased to exist as an independent kingdom, splitting into 3 components: 1 Ottoman, 1 Habsburg, and 1 semi-self-sustaining. This battle opened the gates to Vienna, the center of the Habsburg Empire. The Siege of Vienna, 1529. Riding the momentum of Mohacs, Suleiman evolved into Austria. In 1529, he laid siege to Vienna itself, though ultimately unsuccessful as a result of harsh weather and deliver shortages. The siege dispatched shockwaves across Christian Europe. Not ever before had a Muslim military stood so almost the Habsburg capital, whilst the Ottomans would by no means take Vienna. This event symbolized the peak of Ottoman army attained into Europe. Naval supremacy, the Mediterranean and beyond Devon. As Suleiman dominated land campaigns, he also became his gaze to the seas. Underneath his leadership and that of legendary admirals like Heredin Barbarossa, the Ottoman navy became a superpower. Combat of Preveza 1538. At Preveza, Barbarossa crushed the mixed fleets of Venice, Spain, and the Papal States, securing Ottoman control over the eastern Mediterranean. This naval dominance would last for generations, allowing the Ottomans to raid, trade, and patrol from North Africa to Greece, and past the Pink Sea and Indian Ocean. Suleiman additionally aimed to counter the Portuguese Empire, which had begun to disrupt Muslim alternate within the Indian Ocean. Ottoman fleets sailed as far as India and East Africa, engaging in battles close Hormuz and Aden, although outcome were combined. Domestic affairs. The lawgiver, despite his conquests, finest legacy could lie in his reforms. As Kanuni, he situated a coherent authorized framework that will undergo for centuries. The Qanon, a secular legal order Suleiman codified and harmonized Sharia Islamic legislation with Qanon secular law. These legal guidelines outlined property rights, taxation, and commercial rules, clarified criminal regulation, together with punishments for theft, homicide, and corruption, outlined the responsibilities of provincial governors and officers, protected the rights of dhimmis underneath Ottoman rule. This authorized process introduced balance, uniformity, and a measure of justice to a multi-ethnic, multi-religious empire. Bureaucratic reform. Suleiman professionalized the empire's administration, expanded the devshirme system to recruit elite bureaucrats and military officers, reinforced the power of the Grand Vizier, principally Ibrahim Pasha, Suleiman's childhood buddy, centralized control over newly conquered provinces, principally in Hungary, the Levant, and Egypt, a court docket of splendor, culture, and structure. Suleiman's technology used to be not most effective one in all vigor, but in addition of amazing cultural blossoming, his courtroom in Istanbul grew to be the envy of the arena, with poets, scholars, architects, and artisans from across the empire. Mima Sinan, the master architect, finest artist of this golden age, was once Mima Sinan, Suleiman's chief architect, a former Janissary engineer. Sinan designed the Suleimani Mosque, an Istanbul masterpiece rivaling Hagia Sophia, dozens of bridges, aqueducts, and public works during the empire. Provincial mosques in Damascus, Edom, and the Balkans. Buildings expressed the empire's ideological grandeur, grace, vigor, and permanence. Literature, science, and philosophy. Suleiman himself was once a poet below the pen. Title: Mehibi. His verses speak of affection, divine justice, and loneliness, a distinction to his stern imperial persona. Meanwhile, students in Istanbul and Cairo evolved astronomy, medication, geography, and law. The empire's schools and libraries increased, becoming facilities of Islamic studying. Palace intrigue. The shadow of Haremno. Story of Suleiman is entire without point out of harem sultan, additionally known in Europe as Roxolana, Ukrainian slave woman who grew to be the sultan's wife and an vastly robust political determine. Not like previous sultans, Suleiman married harem legally, breaking precedent. She bore him multiple sons and became his closest confidant. Harem influenced court docket appointments and succession planning, diplomatic correspondence, and charitable foundations. The construction of her possessed mosque and problematic in Istanbul. Her rise led to the fall of Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, who used to be achieved in 1536 underneath mysterious situations, seemingly influenced by harem-s developing vigor. Her rival, Mahidevran, and her son Mustafa, had been sidelined. Mustafa Vias, as the most ready inheritor, was accomplished. In 1553, beneath suspicion of plotting uprising, doubtless fueled by way of court docket whispers, the act greatly surprised the empire. This period marked the emergence of the Sultanate of Ladies, when imperial mothers and better halves would preserve enormous at the back of the scenes, impact over coverage and succession. Later years and decline. Suleiman's later years have been marked by means of health problem, grief, and slow retreat from public existence. Harem died in 1558, and many of his relied-on advisors have been long past. He more and more relied on Rustam Pasha, his son-in-law, and others of questionable loyalty by way of the 1560s. Army campaigns yielded diminishing returns, corruption unfolded within the provinces, factionalism at court dockets started to rot imperial cohesion. Yet Suleiman remained lively unless the end. In 1566, at the age of 72, he led one final campaign to besiege the fortress of Szigетva in Hungary. He died in his tent in the course of the siege, but his demise was once kept secret, except victory used to be secured. Legacy of the very good Suleiman's legacy is multifaceted and enormous. Territorial height. The Ottoman Empire stretched from Algiers to Baghdad, from Budapest to Aden. Legal groundwork. His legal guidelines governed the empire until its ultimate days within the 20th century. Cultural explosion. His era produced one of the finest works of Islamic artwork and structure. Dynastic complication. His court set in motion succession crises and the increasing energy of the harem. To the Islamic world, he was Kanuni, the restorer of justice. To Europe, he was once the amazing ruler who stimulated fear and recognize in equal measure. Suleiman's rule represented the pinnacle of Ottoman vigor, but additionally sowed the seeds of future challenges. His son and successor, Selim II, would inherit an empire bursting with energy but fragile at its core.